for this week's Come Follow Me lesson with the Mormon News podcast, part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. My name is Jenny Noonan Dye, and I am joining you from Provo, Utah, along with my husband, John Dye, who's the one responsible for all you see on your screen, for those of you who are joining us, partaking of the live video stream we're doing on Facebook. And you may hear his voice, you might get to see his face, but usually he kind of stays off to the side. As always, for those who are participating in real time here on our video stream, we'd love to hear from you, where you are, what stood out to you in your study this week, whether it's the first time or the 50th time you've read these verses, or even if you didn't read them at all. That's fine. We're glad that you're here, and we get to as many comments as we can, just as we would if we were gathered together in person. Today, I'm excusing my co-host for the Mormon News Report podcast, Brant Malone. He's in Detroit, and he's tending to some family responsibilities. And as always, welcome our good friend, our Come Follow Me expert, with all the wealth of knowledge when it comes to our Come Follow Me study, the one who makes it the Hour of Power, all the way to California. It's Ben Bernards. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. As Brent would say, with traffic and weather every 10 minutes on the nines, it is today's AP study of church history and Doctrine and Covenants, giving you a little extra toolkit to boost your Come Follow Me study. You know, if regular Sunday school is like an ordinary popcorn popping apricot tree, then maybe today's class is kind of the zebra striped white chocolate drizzled salty sweet bonus bag of content that you get from Costco that you actually buy for yourself and hide from the kids for that 1 a.m. binging of Queen's Gambit, or so I've told.
Yeah, never heard of it. Never heard of it at all. It's definitely the one piece, right? The one with all the chocolate on it. You're like, oh, this is the prize. Yeah, this week's lesson today is Sunday, April 18th, 2021. And the name of the lesson this week is If Ye Are Not One, Ye Are Not Mine. And it covers Doctrine and Covenants sections 37 through 40. And I mean, this probably goes without saying, Ben, but it's interesting to me that as we go through the Doctrine and Covenants, it's not like there's a standard length of each section. And sometimes as we're reading, it's like, oh, that section was 4 verses, or that section was 7 verses. And next week we have quite a lot of reading, but this week I feel like it went kind of quickly. So I'm eager to hear what you have to say as as we dive into the kind of bonus material.
All the extra good stuff we get to talk about today. You know, that's kind of the tricky thing about trying to understand how the DNC works, is that, you know, it's not like the Bible, it's not like the Book of Mormon, it's very unique and very different, and there was no one way that's perfect to slice and dice everything. So what we look at here, and hopefully longtime listeners and participators in this class have been able to understand that we look for the common themes. We look at like an overall topic, and then we try to zoom out and abstract at one level and say, okay, what can we learn from this entire thing? And sometimes that will be like 6 verses. You know, sometimes we'll skip over 6 entire sections. But today is the first time that we get to see the early Latter-day Saints getting the call to go to a far-off mystical place in the West. For them, it wasn't the golden trampoline hills of Erda where the elves of Lothlorien went to. This was a place called Zion. Something that they had seen from the Bible, something that they understood kind of in a metaphorical sense, but they were getting this first call to go there. And spoiler alert, it didn't turn out so good. And they tried again, and it didn't turn out so good the second time. And they've been trying over and over again. So instead of just simply talking about what Zion is or was, I hope that we can have a better understanding of why they didn't get there. And then how does that apply to us? So I would like to lead off with a question for Jenny or for John or for anybody else that's participating there. Has there ever been a time in your life when you have felt like an outsider?
Like Pony Boy?
Say again?
Like Pony Boy?
Yeah.
S.E. Hinton, the author, yeah.
Wah, wah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Several times a week, or no? Yeah, lots of different, whether it's long term or short term. Yes, absolutely. I felt like an outsider.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, anytime you're in a new situation and you're unsure what the dynamics of that group are, whether it's a new class, think of a new semester starting or a new school year when you were younger, maybe in high school or junior high, right? And just the new dynamics of everyone being around and not understanding where your place is in that and how you can contribute, and will I make friends? Will I fit in? Will people like me? I think those are all, kind of socially scary situations.
Yeah. So how do you overcome it? Do you just stick it out and wait for it to get better, or do you wind up bailing and saying this isn't me, or do you find some happy medium? How do you get over the sense of not feeling like you don't belong as part of the group?
I think that's a great question. There are lots of times when I have felt not part of a group, and then later, whether because I reached out to someone else and made a connection, or someone else reached out to me and made a connection, or just kind of as a group, whatever that might look like, we kind of evolved together, experienced things together, and that provided connection. That has been some stuff, but I'll be honest, there have been other times when I have felt like an outsider, and no matter what I did, it always seemed that I was going to be the outsider, and I was, and it was difficult. To overcome it, I tried to realize places where, like other places where I wasn't an outsider, and that helped.
That, I think you really bring up a good point about trying to get out and trying to establish connections, and recognizing that there has to be something on the other side of somebody also wanting to make a connection. And sometimes there might be a really clear boundary between those two, and despite all your best efforts, there's no connection there. And so, we either can try to find ways to remove the barriers or take it down, or we can say, if there's other places where I can establish better connections, then that's where I'm going to go. When I was in high school, I followed my older brother around a lot in his social circles, because it was very easy. I could just ride his coattails, and he had a ton of friends, and they were all totally friendly, and I could get tagged along as, his little brother, and that was cool. And then sometimes that even followed him into extracurricular activities. Like, hey, he signed up for chess club. All right, I don't care about chess, but I'm going to go. Or, hey, he signed up for ballroom dance. All right, I'm going to sign up for ballroom dance, and I'm going to go. And actually wound up joining the ballroom dance team for a couple of years, until the point when he was gone, and it was just me by myself after he had graduated, and I was there, and I kind of looked around, and I was like, do I really love this? And I had this sense of like, I've been here with these people for so long, and I've learned just enough to do something more than the electric slide out there on the floor, but I'm not feel like this is not me. And I had to sat down and ask myself, where do I really belong? Like, where do I feel like I connect? And for me, it was marching band. So I bailed on the ballroom and went back to marching band, and got back to that kind of a thing. Now, this scripture story that we're talking about today has nothing to do with ballroom, and it has nothing to do with marching band, but it does have everything to do with gathering, and it does have everything to do with connecting. And I don't know, it's kind of a tricky thing for us to try to accomplish, given the circumstances with, life around us. Have you guys had challenges, or kind of a silly question, what has it been like trying to gather or feel connected for you as the past several months or year?
Wow, that's not a loaded question. I'll be honest. It's one thing that's been interesting to me is the early use of the phrase social distancing. Because for me, both John and I think you too, Ben, are pretty into technology, and even with social media, which I know gets a bad rap, and for a lot of times for good reason. There are ways to connect online and have actual relationships can evolve. Now, are they a substitute for in person? No, but can they serve a proper and a positive function? Absolutely. And so that's why kind of from the beginning, I tried to more use the phrase physical distancing rather than social, because we've kind of had to, even as a matter of emotional and mental health connect being physically distanced using technology. We can still be social using technology. It's something that, in new and innovative ways, to be honest. I mean, there was a time last spring when every night at a certain time I'd get dinged by a friend and we'd all log in and play a game together, like just people, varying locations, but it was a way to kind of socialize.
That's awesome.
And, that being said, it's brought to mind a lot of questions about like, well, what can we do to help one another connect when it's impossible to physically gather. I know a lot of people had their own pods, where it's people who are like, okay, we're going to make a deal with our families that we can socialize with each other.
No cheating. Everybody stick in it.
Yeah, and we've got to protect the pod, right? Like, don't go out and bring any other germs in, and that takes a great deal of commitment. It takes a great deal of discipline, really, and to be honest, asking a lot of hard questions. If it's like, okay, well, I'm only talking to a few other people, it's like, well, then, we've got to make a decision of what you're going to do. So yeah, it's been very easy, very interesting to see over the past year or so. I do want to get to some comments because some people are chiming in where they're watching from. Like Peggy is joining us from Sandy, which for where John and I are is just a short drive away. Tony is joining us from England, and that's a socialization and a gathering that probably wouldn't happen otherwise if it weren't for tech. I do want to also share what Jeanette has shared. Thank you, Jeanette, for this comment. She says, as a divorced older woman, I feel like an outsider sometimes at church activities like ward and adult parties. Absolutely. I was divorced for a time, and I can empathize with that. And I think going through those experiences can help us to have empathy for those around us who might be in other marginalized groups. It's like when you have an experience that puts you in that position, I think then you start to see others who might be dealing with the same.
And I think we are so blessed for you and others like that, having that perspective, because like you said, Jeanette, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but they can feel invisible, especially in a society where we talk about marriage and kids, and that's the family unit, and anything that's not that is somehow the other. That whole idea of feeling like an other, being outside that main group, is something that we struggle with today. And the church has been going for close to 200 years now, and we're still struggling trying to figure out how that works. So there's a couple things in the DNC today that hopefully can help us get better at it. And that's one of the things that we wanted to take a look at. In Doctrine and Covenants 38, we're going to kind of set the scene here. There's this first call to gather into one particular area. Jenny, actually, could I have you read something for us? This is in DNC 38, 31 through 33. And as we read this, there's a lot of different things that they are promised is going to happen when they arrive in this magical area. Will you read that for us, please?
You bet. And that ye might escape the power of the enemy, and be gathered unto me a righteous people, without spot and blameless. Wherefore, for this cause, I gave unto you the commandment, that ye should go to the Ohio, and there I will give unto you my law, and there you shall be endowed with power from on high. And from thence, whosoever I will shall go forth among all nations, and it shall be told them what they shall do. For I have a great work laid up in store, for Israel shall be saved, and I will lead them whithersoever I will, and no power shall stay my hand.
Excellent, thank you. So man, we could spend like hours just picking apart every single little piece and element that's in there, but let's kind of dissect just a few things on here. So first off, most of the people in the church in these days were living in Eastern Pennsylvania or New York region. John, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, let's take a look at the map. We have a rough idea as to where these people were. So up in northeastern New England is where a lot of these saints were. We had different little clusters and little villages like Colesville and Harmony and everything, and they're being told to go to Ohio. Last night, I was digging around on some online maps. It turns out that the distance from Harmony to Kirtland, Ohio is roughly about 360 miles. So for those Utah folks, that's about the distance from St. George in the south to Logan up in the north. That's how far they had to go. And these people needed to do it on foot or in a wagon if they were rich enough to afford a wagon and horses. And if you can do about 8 to 10 miles a day on a good day with good clear weather, you're looking at about a month to a month and a half of travel just to get there. And then you've got to plant your crops and buy some land if it's for sale and if you've got money. Then you've got to build a home if you can afford it. And you've got all these problems that are going to start to come up. So this whole idea of going to Zion or going to Kirtland to gather for that first thing, I mean, this is a big deal. This was no small thing. And some of the other sections later on in 39 and 40 actually touched just lightly on some people that said, this is too much. I can't do it. The cost is too high. The emotional toll to get out there is too great. I'm not gonna be able to do it. So question a little bit about gathering. So we saw that it says things like they were promised escaping power of the enemy, or something about pouring out a blessing. Do any of those things really stand out to you today as, man, that's a huge blessing. I can't wait to see how that could happen in my life. Does anything stand out in those verses to you?
Hey, Ben, it's John. I'm going to add a few things here. One thing before we leave the migration, the request, this was given, if memory serves, I believe in January too. So if you're talking about the least fortuitous probably time of the year, I mean, in the Eastern United States where they're at right now too, I mean, they are just known for hard winters. And so, it wasn't in the middle of summer. It wasn't right after they had finished pulling their crops in and, selling those off. And this was like, hey, no one wants to come buy our land. There's a lot of these issues that they're running into as well. So back to your other question though, which is, ask that again really quick.
Actually, yeah, pop to the next slide. The question is basically, why gather? Like, what stands out to us as the benefit of gathering? We kind of touched on this a little earlier at the top of the show, but what was promised to them and what benefits could we see now for us?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're given specifically when we gather, sorry, as I try to get this correct, is, there's strength in numbers. We know that. There's strength, especially for a fledgling religion, right? A spiritual tradition that's being created at the time. They are trying to insulate one another, right? That's why when they went overseas, as we find out later, and as they send missionaries out, they ask them to pull them back in because there are strength in numbers. We find that gathering, obviously, that's why we're asked to go to a sacrament meeting every week, right? And to fan the flames of one another's testimonies. I think there's something that happens when you're in a group of believers, whether that's a religious tradition, whether that's people that believe in a certain political persuasion, Bitcoin, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, what have you, right? I think there's just mutual interest, and being able to do that allows, I think, for specifically here, where really this religion, if you think about it, if you didn't have the Lord in it, we knew it was predestined to work out. But if you didn't, you need these people to come together to create that strength and that power.
That's a really good point. I think when we look at why and how people gather in any setting, we realize that it can bring challenges, right? If our motivation is fear or control over something or disgust for a different group or whoever is not part of that inside group, then a very common rhetorical pattern will be to establish boundaries and say that over there is dangerous, Where we are here is safe. Over there, those people are bad, but these people are good. That way is wrong, and this way is right. And I think that taps into a primal instinct that everybody has of survival and protection, which does have its place, but that can unfortunately drive us to look for other threats and eliminate them and push them out and keep ourselves safe. We have a couple of people chiming in in the comments, like Tony says that he first felt like an outsider when I first joined the church. But that didn't last too long, as he was in his 20s and got active in the young adult program, and he was blessed in that he could make friends easily, which is really awesome. They folded him in. Another thing that Brenda says is, I feel like an outsider with my ward. I moved here to take care of my sister. The ward has been telling my brother and other sister that I'm trying to control her. One person even told me that my sister was happier before I moved here. All I can do is trust that the Lord Jesus Christ, that I am here for what he wants me to do. And, you bring up a really good point that sometimes we'll be brought together with people, and sometimes you can feel no more alone than when you're in a crowd. And that loneliness can feel even more painful when it's a crowd that you feel like you should be a part of. I think this kind of touches on a broader point that we can understand. And one of the toolkits that I help to help people walk away with today is understanding patterns for human connection, so we can see them in our lives and recognize where we are with them and how we can get better for them. And this is the kind of the way that I look at it. It's kind of like stages of not human development, but kind of human connection along the way. And I think every one of us has probably gone through this to one degree or another. So if you're listening to this or seeing this, I hope some of this makes sense. John, if you would go to the next one, please. I see the connections that we have coming in three main stages, and they kind of build on each other, but they're also on a spectrum. The first stage is simple independence. This is absolute foundational self-reliance. This is where you can do things in and of your own power. You are reliant on nobody else. You are free of whatever was pulling you down before, and you are self-reliant. Now, at that stage of connection where you're not really bound to anybody else, you are able to consume roughly at the same level that you're able to produce, right? And if you've got a finite amount of time throughout the day, if you're living alone, you can either build a house or you can go work in the fields, but you don't have enough time or energy to do both. So this is a good starting point. This is a good foundation where you can learn to become self-reliant, but you'll barely be able to make enough to live, let alone thrive and expand. So this is intended as a starting point, but not the stopping point. And the focus of that, or the mentality of that independent connection, or lack of connections really, is basically saying, I need me for me. You're independent, you're disconnected from everybody else. Okay? So that's kind of the foundation. The next stage this goes to, John, if you'd go to the next one, please, is codependence. This is where you realize there's other people around you and you can start making transactions with them, because maybe you're going to work on the house and they're going to work on the field because they're better at working in the fields than you are, and you're better at working on the house than they are. So there's an imbalance. Now, imbalance is not necessarily a bad thing. That is what facilitates these sorts of transactions. And that's the thing, is that this codependence is transactional. So this is where the mentality is, instead of saying, I need me for me, this is where we say, I need you for me, because you are doing something better and faster than I can, and I'm doing something better and faster than you can. So we're going to have this little transactional relationship. We are dependent on each other. Now, the downside to this is that it tends to consume faster than it produces because of that inequality, because the focus is still on ourselves. It's still not a sustainable model, because due to the nature of that inequality and that imbalance, once that transaction is no longer profitable, once those resources are used up or the relationship is over, then there's no reason to have that transaction. There's no reason to be dependent on that person. And here is the problem and the flaw with these first two stages that we find ourselves in all the time. It is that they tend to thrive on the mentality that life is a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game, meaning there's one winner and everybody else is a loser. And when we look at life through that lens of a zero-sum game, it means that if you see somebody else getting more than you, then you're going to lose. And that means that person's a threat. And so then we will do everything we can to stop other people from getting help. Even if we think that, even if those people wind up having nothing at all, it's always about ourselves. Okay, so you with me there? So we start independent and then we become codependent on other people, but it's all short term. There has to be something better. There has to be a better stage that can thrive, the societies can thrive on if they can get there. And that brings us to the third one, which is interdependence. If independence was foundational self-reliance and codependence was transactional inequality, interdependence is all about intergenerational sustainability, meaning that engine that is comprised of multiple small pieces that are all connected like lots of little tiny gears, and they have a magical fuel source that keeps the entire thing running. That is something that winds up producing more than it consumes, and there winds up being more than enough for all. Interdependence will leverage your strength that you have, yeah, because maybe that imbalance is still there. But then it simultaneously will explore and admit to their own weaknesses and say, I need somebody else to help compensate for this. Interdependence is that moment when we realize that life is not a zero-sum game. It's a cooperative game, and we're all on the same team, which means we will all either win or lose the game together. And when all those gears start falling apart, when people start treating it as a transactional relationship and they break off in their own strict independence or just codependence, that's when the engine starts to break down. And only when we pull people in together into that interdependent model can something get going that can last from generation to generation. That is the time when we say, it's not about me needing myself or me needing other people. It's realizing, who out there needs me? What do I have that I can give to this community? And if everybody's focused on that, then it's going to survive. So let me pause right there. Jenny, John, and the class, what are your thoughts? Is this making sense?
Absolutely. I think those are three really great examples of how we do connect. And I think it's interesting because it depends on what we're discussing, right? Like in this case, what we're talking about is creating Zion. We're talking about a community, because in a lot of mental health practices, these very terms are brought up. And to be clear, overall, there are benefits to independence and even codependence. This is kind of a newer thing. It used to be that that codependence is something that was looked down upon, that was looked at as something equating weakness. But they're finding socially and emotionally in connection that there are times when codependence is actually appropriate and even beneficial. But I think what you said, Ben, really gets to the heart of that, which is as long as it's temporary, right? There are times when it is appropriate for us as individuals, as part of a community, to be independent, to rely on ourselves, to realize that we can take charge. There are times as individuals, as part of a community, that we are codependent, that someone else has something that will benefit us and that we have something that will benefit another person. There isn't anything inherently wrong with either of those things. It's just that which are you know, what's the end game? Like it's if it is a zero-sum game and that's all you're doing, it's not sustainable, it's not effective, and it just doesn't last. The interdependence, I think, is wonderful because it sets a precedent and really goes to the core of what we want to do, what it means to be of one heart, what it means to be a community. It's interesting, and I don't want to drive off a cliff with this left turn I'm going to take. And here we go. But one thing that's interesting is that, and I'll try to be as neutral as I can on this. It is not uncommon right now, and for a long time, and probably a long time to come, for a topic of discussion in the United States specifically, to revolve around gun control is what people call it, or maybe even gun regulation. And there are points that are made on various sides and for various reasons. But one thing that I have always found interesting is this idea that in an emergency, what a lot of people say is, I want a gun to protect my family, to protect my home, to protect what we have. And I just think about how a year ago we were in an emergency, and we weren't supposed to go out, and we had to stay in our homes. And I don't know, and I know that my view and experience is limited, but I don't know any people who, if they were reached out to by a neighbor for something that they needed, approach that situation with absolutely not. And I'm going to defend my things and my family. It really was more,
I'm coming after your toilet paper.
Right. When we lived a version of that potentially frightening thing that, again, I don't want to get into, I just think it's really telling that everyone that I know acted interdependently. It was this kind of like, hey, I'm in need of Lysol, but there aren't any available to be delivered at any of the stores. Does anyone have some? Yes, I've got some. Oh, can I buy it from you? No, I don't want any money for it, but do you have some eggs? And it really was this community emerged in the face of, if not disaster, at least emergency. And that was very telling to me, just about the individual members and units, smaller units, families, households, of the community at large.
Absolutely. John, would you mind pulling up the next slide, please? Jimmy, I think your story and your observations there are absolutely point on, that we realize that if I were to throw a vertical axis to measure how self-centered or selfless these three modes of connection are, I think everything you've described lines up with this, where we see that independence is by its nature self-centered, and that's not a bad thing. Interdependence can be even more, codependence can be even more self-centered, because you're looking at what you can get for yourself out of that other person. And like you mentioned, there are times when that is appropriate and that is healthy. However, both of those lie in very stark contrast to the selfless characteristic of being truly interdependent. And I love how we have seen, amidst the trial and the tragedies and the screams and the sorrows of the past 14 months of pandemic, we have seen the better angels prevailing from time to time, where it has refined us, and we have been able to see those glimmers of gold deep down inside our soul that have stood out. I would have loved to see more, and I know that all I can do is offer up what tiny little piece I have to the community around me. But maybe that's this idea of what trying to find Zion is. When we're talking about all this, that's the big question. What does this have to do with the saints gathering to Kirk? What's the whole point? Well, I think the point of this scriptural story is that gathering in one place is always more. It's about more than just getting together and building a city. It's about more than just everybody living in the same neighborhood. It's about more than everybody just being Mormon. It's supposed to be about the transformation, about who we become. It sounds silly, but literally the real treasure is the friends we made along the way. That's what we're supposed to become. And I think part of this is to help us get to a shift of how we view each other and how we look at each other and how we treat each other. John, could you pull up the next slide? This is from D&C 38. And if you wouldn't mind reading for us, this is D&C 38, 24 through 27.
All right. I will pull that.
Just a second.
There we go. And I'll make this. There we go. And
24 through 20, please.
You bet. And let every man esteem his brother as himself, and practice virtue and holiness before me. And again, I say unto you, let every man esteem his brother as himself. For what man among you, having 12 sons, and is no respecter of them, and they serve him obediently, and he saith unto the one, Be thou clothed in robes, and sit thou here, and to the other, Be thou clothed in rags, and sit thou there, and looketh upon his sons, and saith, I am just? Behold, this I have given unto you as a parable, and it is even as I am. I say unto you, Be one, and if ye are not one, ye are not mine.
Ooh, boy. Verse 27. I mean, that's like boom, the whole thing. So what does that mean to you? What stands out to you, either that last verse or anything else that you just read?
Yeah, to your point, in verse 27, be one. Be one. If you're not one, you're not mine. I remember very distinctly, Jenny and I went to the, June 1st, was it 2 years ago? Yeah, the B1 event, honoring the commemoration of the Blacks receiving the priesthood and temple blessings. And it was the what? 40th year. I was trying to remember the exact anniversary. It was incredible. And I think what he's saying is exactly that, right? We're realizing this in, our culture today, even more so now, I believe, than we almost ever have, maybe in the 60s. But we're hearing this from leaders. We're hearing this across the pulpit in general conference and in other settings. He doesn't esteem one individual above another based on race, based on color of skin, based on ethnicity. And I think it's time that we take that to heart, right? We really understand that, because we've had some long-standing traditions that have led us to the point we're at.
Yeah, it can be tragic when we see how, and sorry for our international friends that are listening or paying attention. I know that so much of this is so US centric, but I think there's probably universal challenges here. Humans are still trying to come to an agreement as to whether other humans even matter. I mean, that right there, it's going to take us a while to agree that other humans matter. And also to simultaneously realize that by saying another person matters does not diminish how much I matter at all, because we're all in this connected, right? It's a cooperative game. And this brings up this interesting idea of how our brains deal with comparison. There's this hypothetical scenario that I would do. I ran this scenario through my seminary class whenever I was teaching that, and I actually saw it presented to us in an economics class at Brigham Young University as a way of illustrating how silly and just downright stupid our brains can be sometimes. Because there's like this human operating system code in there that we really don't see, and we only observe it when it gets manifested. So here's a hypothetical scenario. Everybody play along if you're listening to this, if you're watching for the first time. John, would you pull up the next slide? Here's the scenario. Let's say, go one more. Okay, let's say that you work for a company. There's 3 people. It's you and a guy and a girl, all right? And you all you're all doing the same job. You all take the same salary. You all have the same expenses at home. So as far as you can tell, everything in your life is like you guys are pretty much clones of each other, all right? And then one day, you, not the other 2 people, you get a birthday bonus of a pile of cash. All right. So off the top of your head, what emotions would you probably be feeling if you get that birthday bonus? Jenny, how would you feel? Somebody walks in, hands you a couple $100.
That's great. Thank you very much.
And we're not talking about the Jelly of the Month Club, right?
Not the Jelly of the Month Club. That would be totally cool. Maybe my wife would give me like a Lego set or something. That would be totally cool. But so in this case, you're feeling totally joy. Okay. Now, part 2, the next month is one of the coworkers, and he gets a birthday bonus as well. And go ahead, John, next slide. And you hear from him that his birthday bonus was smaller than yours. Now, how do you feel about that?
That someone else got a smaller one?
Yeah. How does it make you feel?
Uncomfortable.
A little bit uncomfortable. Okay. How does it make you feel in regards to your original bonus? Maybe he doesn't know how much you got, but if you're looking at his smaller one, but your bigger one, the one that you were just seconds ago, you were totally joyful about. Now, how do you feel about it? Do you feel any more joyful about it?
Well, someone might. I don't know what answer you're looking for, to be honest.
We wish we knew the characters from this Pixar movie better.
Well, I think it'd be like, oh wow, that's great. It could go two ways, right? It could be a self-inflating, like, oh yeah, like kind of I don't know, it ranks people. It's a way, right? And so, but to me, that would be worrisome, to be honest.
Sure. So just to be clear, there's no one right answer here. And we did this in the first time was in a economics class of like 800 kids, and he would take a pulse, and on average, he saw a repeated pattern that once you get your own benefit for yourself, people were satisfied. When you found out that your benefit that you were originally satisfied, when you found out that it was actually better than somebody else's, then the response was a mixture of, oh, I'm extra special, I'm extra loved, I'm a little bit confused, I'm a little bit embarrassed, how come I got a little bit more? Some of us would even say, oh, in their pride, oh, I'm so much better, I love it. And in fact, my own sense of worth has gone up because I know that I'm getting more than somebody else.
Yes.
And that's kind of an uncomfortable thing to admit, but maybe there's a piece somewhere back in our minds, for some of us, not all of us, where we say, wow, I feel a tiny bit better because I know that I got a little bit more. Now, here's stage 3. The third person also got a bonus the following month, and hers was hecka bigger than yours. Okay, so let's be honest. How do you think you would feel in that kind of a scenario?
Dumb. But it would make me question even more because, and I know this is a hypothetical situation. For me, I tend to think it through, and it's like, is the bonus for work, like for the work that's done? Because if the bonus is just for having a birthday, there's no one who achieves having a birthday at a higher standard than someone else, and so that seems like
a birthday.
Yeah. What was it? Infuriating injustice or something, just.
It's not fair.
Yes.
And why is that? And isn't that funny? And, John and anybody else that's listening, can you see yourself in these scenarios where you could have something that just a couple of minutes ago you were perfectly fine with, and everybody else that's getting these bonuses, everybody else has the same expenses as you. Everybody else has done the same job as you, so there's no merit for it. But it's simply the fact that what you received is different from other people that exposes a flaw in our mortality. That when we perceive that we have something more than another person, a default human tendency is to feel smugly satisfied about it. But when we perceive that we have less than another person, even if our base needs are already met, the fact that we receive less feels unfair. And this is part of the problem that we are coming up against. John, would you go to the next one, please? It's summed up in this beautiful quote that's frequently attributed to Theodore Roosevelt. It simply says, "Comparison is the thief of joy." Have you ever heard that before? You ever seen this?
Yes.
All the time, and feel it all the time, right?
Why is that? Is this true in your lives? Have you actually experienced it yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's to your point, if you live in a bubble or if you have blinders on, oftentimes that's another quote, right? Is ignorance is bliss. Not knowing, and those that are managers within a company know that it's a key thing to talk to others with, and you don't know if they actually follow through, but don't talk about monetary bonuses or even compensation, because nothing causes discord more than when that happens. So when you look at your peers, when you look side to side, and that pride, it's almost the pride that, President Benson talked about. It's you valuing yourself based on external factors of how people see you. It's not the intrinsic value you see in yourself, it's how other people see you. And quite honestly, those bonuses you alluded to, those are based on one person or a small group's interpretation of, you know, their viewpoints on you and your work ethic, etc. And it's hard when those external things become internal, because we see that with body image, with girls and women and even men, and all of these other things where this pervades society in so many sectors.
Jenny, what are your thoughts? Comparison is the thief of joy.
I think it can be. And I also think it's important to remember, you know, as you guys talk about that, and John mentioned in a professional setting, why it's not a good idea. I mean, that, and we all know that that's a larger conversation just because of things like wage gap between genders and races and things like that. I think in general, something to be mindful of is that when we are comparing, we don't know the full story. And again, sometimes that's appropriate, but it's either way, it's important, because how often do we compare our very worst to someone else's best, or at least what we perceive? I mean, that's one of the criticisms. Earlier, I talked about some benefits of social media. Yeah, but that's a detriment, to be honest, is that often, you know, and I've even seen, you know, if you see an image, if you just pan out a little bit, that's where the mess starts, right? I mean, we frame what we want to show, and just a second. We frame what we want to show, and it's nothing's wrong with wanting to put our best foot forward. But when it comes to comparison, just remember to not compare your worst to someone else's best.
Amen. So what does all this have to do with the saints trying to build Zion and us trying to build Zion? And especially the fact, again, to spoil the ending, the fact that they failed at it. How do these principles apply, do you think?
John, your thoughts?
Well, I often think too that we create, you know, was the Zion that Christ is seeking different than the Zion that we are seeking? Even if we get the words through revelation, just words fail oftentimes. Does our definition of Zion exactly align with what Christ is seeking, right? We often think of it in numbers. I know that, you know, we give the statistical report for the church, and I think numbers are an important thing because we're trying to gather Israel. We're trying to bring them home. But, you know, I just think oftentimes when we compare, not sure if this is where you're going, but, you know, just the lexicon and the different meanings behind those words are important to follow up on as well.
Absolutely. You know, I think the understanding of these quirks of our human operating system, having an understanding of how these brains work is the first step to being able to better control it. And so many times we respond to others reflexively. You know, as Norma mentioned in the comments as we're walking through that scenario, that, you know, when you first get your first bonus, you feel special and loved. And then when you find out that you're making more than somebody else, that you feel confused. And when you see that you're getting less than somebody else, you can feel angry or cheated out of. You know, Randall says that it's this whole problem of having expectations that sets us up for disappointment. And John, I really like what you said about how Christ's version or his vision of Zion is probably different than what we had. It's so easy to think that Zion is all about everybody getting together in the one city. And, you know, maybe some of the saints, that's what they thought it was, that once you get in the one city, everything's going to be better. You know, the old American tale, there's no cats in America. Once you get there, everything's going to be perfectly fine. And we saw that, yeah, guess what? There are cats there. and everything's not fine. So Zion has to mean something else. And look at us. Here we are today, scattered all across the United States, all around the globe, mind, because we realize that we think that Zion could be something better. And I think that something better is also part of the realization that this is not just the Latter-day Saints who are going to do it. It's not just going to be up to us. The Mormons can't build Zion alone. And it's only when small independent groups of communities step up and realize their interdependence that we can become one. Here's a beautiful story that I saw that happened in real life. This was just last week out of the Philippines. John, you mind pulling up the next one, please? I saw this on the news. This came 2 days ago. There was a small stand in a town in Manila. Sorry, in a street in Manila. This street was very popular with like food trucks and vendors and everything. So tons of people are always there. And one lady had a little bit of extra produce. Now they're dealing with the coronavirus in absolutely catastrophic proportions. And a lot of people have been locked down and lots of people have lost jobs and people are really suffering. And this lady had some extra produce. So she put it on a table and she taped up a little sign on cardboard that simply said, "Give according to your capacity, take according to your need." And she called it the Maginhawa Community Pantry. And that first day, quite a few people went walking by and there was other farmers and other people that had their own produce, and everybody's looking at that going, you can't do that. You're going to run out of food. There's not going to be enough. You can't fix these problems. Surely you're not going to be able to feed the 5,000. The next day, another farmer showed up, and then another one, and then another one. And everybody realized they didn't have to give everything, but maybe they could give something. And so now, as you see in this photo, that table has now been completely overrun with a surplus of food. And then they took it a step further. There's a lot of people that drive tricycles and like little tuk-tuks and different things to help people get around as their jobs. These tricycle drivers said, hey, what if I show up with bags and I start pre-bagging all of this food, and we would then volunteer to go deliver this to homebound people or quarantined people. Now, this started spreading like wildfire. This is just within the past 72 hours, you guys. Like, this is literally, this photo came from the Associated Press on April 16th. So this is exploding over social media as dozens of different nearby towns are realizing they can do theirs as well. And they can say, some college kids set up one outside their dorms. You got other little cities that are setting up, and some are really, really big where you've got tons of farmers coming in and tons of people, and some of them are just very, very small. But the point is, they didn't let their inabilities get in the way of their abilities. They said, I can't fix every problem, but I do have a little bit that I can give. So let me give according to my capacity and take according to my need. And maybe we're all going to make it through this together.
Wow.
That's incredible. Yeah, that is incredible. It reminds me, and this is the best of human nature, right? What we're seeing here. It reminds me too, specifically as we talk about those things that apply to these sections in the Doctrine and Covenants. The early saints, they look back toward what they thought was the law of consecration, which was everyone has to give everything, right? Mm-hmm. It's more of a frame of mind, right? Like you said here, it's being free and being generous and being communal in this way, in a way that hasn't been seen many times in history before. And obviously there's a reason why we're not exactly living that now, because unfortunately not all of human nature is this way. But when we're given snapshots like this, I mean, it just warms your heart. I heard something similar in New York City, where a gentleman did something similar with his hot dog stand. He had to leave for a moment because there was an emergency or something. So he said, hey, just leave the change, or leave your money here, take change from the money other people leave, help yourself, blah, blah, blah. He didn't know what he'd come back to. He came back to just cash reserves. He did, accounting for the things that were taken versus the money that was left. And it was net positive by double or triple. So, there are good people in this world, and this warms your heart.
It's so great. Jenny, any final thoughts before I go into my final comments?
No, I think that's a great analogy for what we've studied this week. Thank you.
Awesome. When we talk about this whole idea of Zion, and John, you mentioned how the early saints were trying to figure out their version of it as well. When you read the Old Testament, you have this story of the people of Enoch, the city of Enoch, and how they took hundreds of years to evolve into Zion. And I think if you try to take the Old Testament literally, then that story is problematic, because those people lived for hundreds of years, which simply doesn't happen. So that story couldn't have happened in our lifetime. It happened in some bygone era with some mystical people that don't really exist anymore. But if you take that story metaphorically, then maybe the whole founding of Zion can happen, but maybe it just takes a really, really long time. And it requires constant pruning and constant evolution to bring out the best selves. And it takes a lot of problems and struggles. To quote one of my absolute favorite hymns, I want to figure out how to be my brother and sister's keeper. I want to learn the healer's art. Not the science, but the art. Meaning there's more than one way to do it. And I have to try to figure out to give to the wounded and the weary. And so this means that if my culture or my lifestyle or my worldview is focused on establishing boundaries of the out crowd, of labeling the others as being less than, I'm saying that my tribe comes first and all the others come second. If I normalize the language that these others are somehow deserving of the woes and the ills and the poorness of life, all those horrible things, if that's what my culture is, then it will rot and die as it consumes itself. It will collapse on itself like a selfishness black hole of individualistic self-righteousness. And wasn't that exactly what Jesus condemned the Jews for in the New Testament, and the Zoramites and the Nephites in the Book of Mormon? And it's still prevalent today, unfortunately. But the good news is, like we saw by those wonderful people in the Philippines, if my culture is focused on breaking down the boundaries, of recentering the marginalized, bringing in the excluded, doing good to all men and women, even those that were labeled as others, then our culture will survive and it will endure. Because we realize that there is no such thing as an other. There is only one eternal self. Maybe the Zion that we yearn for is not a single county in Missouri in which we're going to hide behind bunkers and food storage, but maybe it's already here in our homes amidst the brothers and sisters of all shapes and sizes and colors and faiths and creeds. And that Zion is going to be us, where there's nothing to kill or die for. We're sharing all the world. And you may say that I'm a dreamer. I'm not the only one. Mm-hmm. And I genuinely hope that someday you will join us and we can join them, and the world will be one as God said he wanted us to be.
I like it. And if we're not there already, if it's not in Missouri, then we, can sure work toward it.
I have one thing too. That was beautiful, and I traditionally wouldn't say anything to end off, but as you were discussing this slide and what you just said, Ben, imagine if in our missionary efforts, in our efforts to gather Israel, instead of saying, you need us to the world, what if we said, we need you? As you wrote on this interdependence piece on the far right, who needs me for them, right? Specifically though, we as a church need you. We know that you don't necessarily, you can live your life without us. We know that you need the covenants, you need the saving principles and powers that we have. But instead of coming from a position of superiority, what if we approached them and said, we need you. We need you with all your cracks and fissures. We need you with all of your strengths and all of your ailments, all of your weaknesses, because we only become perfect and whole together. I love that.
Wow. Well,
absolutely.
Thank you both so much for all the contributions. This was just a lovely lesson. I'm really grateful for everyone who contributed, who participated, even if you didn't speak up or type out. Thank you for being here. Next week, we will meet together again. So that will be Sunday, April 25th. 9 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time-ish. We usually begin between 9 and 9:20. And that's live, so all the other time zones included. Next week's lesson is called My Law to Govern My Church, and it covers Doctrine and Covenants, sections 41 through 44. And so we really look forward to having that discussion. Thank you once again to everyone who was here. Thank you to John. Thank you to Ben. And thanks again, all of you who are with us, whether watching or listening. Have a great week. We'll see you again soon.